Welcome back to A Conversation with Carl. Today we're talking about higher education. But as always, before we begin, remember to hit the subscribe button if you enjoy. Today, my guest, Jeff Salingo, helps students find the college that suits them. In his book, New York Times bestseller book, Dream School, Finding the College That's Right for You, he outlines a plan that can work for you. Welcome, Jeff Salingo, to the conversation.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's get started on college is a very hard thing for people, for kids when you're 17 years old, 18 years old, and you're supposed to pick this place that's going to define your life, your friends, what you do. How do you go about finding the college that's right for you?
Well, I think part of the reason why many parents, students, and even counselors look at the rankings is because when you think about the American higher education system, right, we're talking 4,000 colleges and universities. If you take the 2-year colleges out of those, the special purpose ones like the art schools, the music schools, you take the tiny colleges out of there, you're still talking about a universe of 12 to 1,400. That's a little overwhelming to most of us. And so what we end up doing, unfortunately, I think, is look at the rankings. We equate prestige with quality, or we equate rankings, which might rank things that are not important to us as important to us, just because that's what the rankings judge. So what I encourage students to do and parents to do is, before you even put names on a list, the first thing I think you should do is, first of all, what do you want out of the college experience? What do you like most about high school? What do you like least about high school? How do you like to learn? Do you want to be close to home, far from home, rural, urban, small, large, sports matter to you? Like all these things that really should start the college search, because Carl, where I think it often starts is people just putting names on a list that often really don't make a lot of sense and often are based on where they are in the rankings.
But so when you're 17 years old and you're all into sports and that's what you pick a school by, and you get to the school, what happens if it's the wrong place for you? Because a lot of times when you're looking at schools and you're thinking to yourself, should I go there? Should I not go there? And you've got an idea, but you've spent a weekend there, maybe. You spent a day on a tour. How do you know it's the right place?
Well, first of all, you never know. College is an experienced good, as economists refer to it. So you don't know what you're buying until you actually buy it. So I think this idea of a perfect fit is a myth. No one really has a perfect fit. Just like there is no single dream school, even though I call my book that, there is no such thing as a single dream school. But how do you find the best fit is really what I think this should be about. And I think part of it is you do need to spend a little bit more time on campus if you can get there, or more time researching the college than just the quick visit to do a tour. So I often encourage students to, if they get to go to campus, don't just rush, do the tour, run to the restroom, maybe grab something, a bite to eat, and get out of there, right? Try to spend more time before and after the tour on campus. Try to eat in the dining hall if you can, or eat somewhere on campus. Try to talk to some other undergraduates if you can. Sit in on a class if you can, or just get a sense of the vibe of campus. Walking around. I do this a lot, Carl, just in my travels. I often love walking around campuses. I want to see, are students talking to each other? If I could see students interacting with faculty, or are they all alone? I walk through the library often to see what's happening there. That's how, the more time you spend on campus, again, off the official tour, the more you can ensure that it's a good fit.
So a lot of people, when they apply for colleges today, they're applying for 10, 15 schools. When I went to college, I applied for 2, 3 schools. That was it. It was not what we're doing today. Why has that changed so much that people are applying to so many schools?
So it's occurring largely because it's much easier than when we applied to school. I don't know when you applied to school, but I would imagine it's probably around the same time I did, right? When we were still typing up on a typewriter, on an electric typewriter, our applications. And I know I got tired after doing a couple of applications. Now it's much easier because of the Common App online. You're really literally pushing a button to send off another application. So it's just become easier. With that though, becoming easier over the last 20 years, what has also happened is that schools, when you apply to more schools can't really judge their yield. That's the percentage of students who actually enroll after accept it. And so schools are doing all these things to manage that, because they don't want to accept 300 students and only 25 show up, right? They really want to accept only the students that they think are going to show up now. And most yield rates have dropped a lot, again, as students have applied to more schools. And so it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. And so what's happening is schools now are rejecting students or deferring them or putting them on wait lists because they're really not sure they're that interested in actually going there if accepted. And what that has done is raised everybody's anxiety. Oh my God, I'm not going to get in. And so the following year, students are like, well, I knew this kid last year who was waitlisted at X school or was deferred at Y school or was rejected at Z school. And thus I need to apply to 5 more schools. And that's what ends up happening. It's just every year application inflation gets worse.
That happened to my nephew who's at Harvey Mudd right now. But when he was applying for schools, he was waitlisted at so many of the Ivy Leagues. And then that's what you're talking about.
Right. Yes, exactly. So, and they're waitlisted because what ends up happening then is the wait list. Remember, to be a selective school, you have to get a lot of applications and you have to accept very few of them. Now, if your yield rate is good, meaning the percentage of students who actually enroll after accepted, if your yield rate is high, you can actually afford to reject a lot of students. But if your yield rate is low, which it is for most colleges, you have to accept more students just to yield the same number every year. And why they probably did that to your nephew is the wait list is a great tool because it's not an acceptance. It just keeps you out there waiting. And if the school really needs you, they'll take you off that wait list. And that's when you count as an acceptance.
Why is school so unaffordable? When you're looking at, I wrote this down before, when you're looking at Harvard, they have nearly $60 billion in endowments. Why is it so expensive?
Well, so Harvard is a great example. So are many of the Ivy Plus institutions that are using their incredibly large endowments to help especially poor and middle income students pay for college. In fact, most of those big institutions now, you don't have to take out any loans. They're very generous with their financial aid. So if you're middle income and even higher middle income now, they keep raising the numbers on these. You're going there close to free if you can get in. But that's the problem. You can't get in. And then for everybody else, most schools are unaffordable because they don't have the large endowments of the Harvards and the Yales. And every year they have to increase tuition. Some of that tuition comes back in financial aid, meaning they actually turn it around and give it out in financial aid, or they actually never take it in because you just get the discount off the top. But that's why we really have a haves and have-nots in higher education, where Yale and Harvard could, with their huge endowments, afford to not only increase the size of their freshman class, but then pay for tuition for those students. They've just decided not to do that.
Do you think we should be having satellite campuses for Harvard and Yale all around the country?
Not a bad idea. But then people will say, well, is it as good as being in New Haven or Cambridge, right? I think then you would have that argument if that happened.
How should you pick a college? What's the thing that you should be looking at? If I was applying today, what would I be looking for?
Okay, so you want to look for a couple of things. One is you want to look for that first year experience, meaning how do they make that transition from high school to college? I'm really looking, a question I ask on every tour is, what is the freshman year of college like? The second thing you're looking for are connections. How are you going to get to know faculty members? How are you going to get to know other students? How are you going to find that sense of belonging, right? Are they going to put you in a 300-person lecture hall your first semester and you really never get to know the professor? You really never get to know your other students. And most of your time is spent with a teaching assistant. Like, those are questions I don't think parents ask enough of. And then you should be looking for the opportunities for hands-on learning. We know from the research that having an internship or undergraduate research or some sort of deep project-based learning in college really helps you get a job after college, and you're less likely to be underemployed, meaning in a job that doesn't require a college degree. And then at the very end, I think you're also looking for a good ROI. How much is this going to cost me? And how much money can I expect to make in return in terms of a salary? And we now have that information. We know what your net cost is going to be. And we know from the College Scorecard, which is a federal government website, College Scorecard, we know on average what the salary is going to be by major of most of these colleges and universities.
Should we be going to college?
The question of the moment. Should we be going to college? Yes.
Because that's the question that I hear over and over again from a lot of people, like maybe it's technical schools better. I think college was really great for me because I also grew up and I wasn't with my parents. I got to make my own decisions. And as much as I got a degree, I also learned about life.
Yes. And I think that there is a maturation process that happens at college. And I think it's important for that reason. We also know, by the way, it gives you having a college degree gives you a lot of flexibility in life. By the way, that could be a 2 year college degree, that could be a technical degree. There are tons of great jobs out there. I don't think the 4 year residential college is the end all be all for everybody, but some sort of post secondary education, some sort of education after high school is absolutely critical.
So I ask, how is AI affecting colleges? And then my next question after that is, do we have to redefine higher education because of AI?
It's a great question. We don't know yet exactly how it is affecting higher education. We know higher ed has really focused the last couple of years since the introduction of ChatGPT on cheating. And I think that's the wrong focus. AI is a tool. It is going to be a tool. It's going to be a larger tool in the workforce than ever before, than many other tools. And so we should be talking about its responsible, good use in high school and in college as well. And so we're unsure how it's going to change the teaching and learning process. But what we do know is that it is changing the job market already. And that to me, meaning a lot of entry level jobs are changing or disappearing that new college graduates would go into. We don't quite know why. I think some of it's about AI, not all of it is. And I think that it is incumbent on colleges and universities to try to figure out how do we ladder over those entry level experiences. If our graduates are no longer going to get those jobs, if those jobs are no longer going to exist, what do we have to do in the undergraduate years to ensure that these students are employable?
So how did COVID affect colleges?
Yeah, and I think that we know COVID affected colleges, especially in a couple of ways. One is in students there at the time, less engaged, right? Because they weren't in person. We're also now seeing the long-term effects of that as students show up on campuses, less academically prepared, less socially prepared to deal with the intricacies of.
So one of the things I notice with my daughter, social media is a very big way where she gets all her information, and she's not learning how to discern. I would say don't need to use her as an example, but a
Right.
lot of these kids are not learning how to discern information and able to figure out like how to go through stuff and figure stuff out without social media and TikTok telling you what is the right way to go. And how is that going to affect colleges?
It's very interesting that this idea of discernment, of what I call the idea of just figuring things out. Carl, I run into people every day, new college graduates, who really are so used to following a very specific set of instructions, a very set syllabus, as I call it, right? Because that's what they're used to. And then if you deviate from that at all, they can't. They can't figure it out. And to me, if I'm thinking about the role AI is going to play in the job market, anything that is rote and recipe like and instruction like and step like, AI could do 10 times better than humans. And so if I were to lean into any skill, it's the art of figuring things out. Now, some of that comes with experience, right? The two of us can figure things out because we've just dealt with many ambiguous situations over our lifetime that required us to figure things out. But if I were running a college today, I would want to put students into so many unfamiliar situations as possible, because to me, that builds those muscles.
Because I grew up in a newsroom, and that's where I learned how to produce TV news. And I would never, if I was never in the room, I would never been able to learn how to do it. And I couldn't do it from home, and I couldn't do it from not being there. And I think that, um, like one of the things like AI today can help me, but I think it's the people that are going to be successful in the future are the ones that are going to be able to figure out how to do things using AI.
No doubt about it, right? And AI is, again, a tool. It only knows what it knows, so it's not going to take over for you. But it will if, by the way, you don't know anything and you are no better than that.
I mean, one of the things I find fascinating is like when you get onto ChatGPT and you start asking it questions, it's very friendly to you. And you think it's your friend, and it's not your friend. It's a bot.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So, and I know we talked a little bit about this already. How do you find that place to go to?
Yeah. So again, I think a lot of this is, I think we keep thinking we're going to find that perfect fit and it just doesn't exist. And so I think that we need to stop thinking of that perfect fit and really look at, okay, what's important to us? Again, small, large. I always encourage people within 100 miles of their house, they could go and probably see a big public university, a small private liberal arts college, a rural college, a more urban based institution. Go and do that. And that gives you a sense of what you want. Forget about the names at the front. Just go and see what you think of that type of institution first. Then start to look at, okay, who has my major? How big are those majors? What are they known for? What are their outcomes? Then you start to come up with a list. And as you come up with that list, then you get to go to campus and start kicking the tires. What I think happens often, Carl, is that students start the search midstream. What do I mean by that? They just start putting names on a list without having to do those things up front that I just mentioned. Really understanding who they are, what they want out of this process, and what are the institutions that are going to best provide that. But again, I think we often think, oh my God, how am I going to find these institutions? It is like a needle in a haystack, and you're never going to find the perfect institution, but you can get a lot closer to it if you know what you want out of this process.
I have a friend whose daughter just got into medical school in New York, and she got a full ride to a school in the Midwest. And she chose the medical school in New York over the full ride. That's my reaction. Because I think that's not, I think she just felt that New York was the place for her. New York City was the place for her to go to school.
Well, I mean, let me, I don't know enough about her situation to comment fully on it, but maybe she wants to work in the New York area. It might be easier to get a residency than in New York and live in New York. I get that, right? Like one of the things we should think about is if, we want to live in the Northeast or we think we want to live on the East Coast, going to school on the West Coast, and depending on where you go, most employment markets are local and regional. So you're more likely to end up working on the West Coast if you go to school in the West. Not all the time and not at every school and not in every major, but that is, if you look at the data, that definitely is true. So in this case, this student might have said, well, if I go to medical school in the Midwest, I'm going to, end up in the Midwest and I don't want to live there. Now, again, that's a pretty big decision to be making with the difference between paying and not paying.
What is the difference between like a private school and public schools?
In terms of what?
When you're looking at private schools and you're looking at public schools, Harvard, and then you're looking at Michigan State or University of Michigan, should you be going to one of those? How do you pick the difference between a private and a public school?
I think some of this has less to do with public-private than it has to do with size, than it has to do with many small private schools are more focused on undergraduates and in teaching and liberal arts than the big research public university. So I would focus less on the public-private divide. I would focus more on, is this a research university or is this an undergraduate college? Things like that would be, I think, more pertinent at this point.
And should people or students be looking at international schools? I know two people that went to medical school internationally. Is that a new thing?
So I think medical school internationally has always been a thing, especially I know the Caribbean has always been a big thing for medical school. We are seeing an uptick in the number of undergraduates going to outside the U.S. That is a more of a newer phenomenon, the increase being, right? American students have always gone overseas, but I think and actually when you look at the numbers, they have been on the uptick. Still pretty small, by the way. I think that a lot of American students think about it, they even go tour it, and then they realize they really want the traditional American undergraduate experience, which you're not going to get in Canada or the UK or the Netherlands. You're going to get a very good education, but it's not the traditional American experience. But there's definitely on the increase. Just a little anecdote here, Carl, is a couple weeks ago, I toured McGill University in Montreal, and of the entire tour group, only one was Canadian. The rest were Americans.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard a lot of students saying they go look at McGill.
No, it is fascinating.
How did you get into writing about college and education?
Great question. I was editor of my student newspaper in college at Ithaca College as an undergrad, and I just become interested in kind of these institutions that were essentially small, businesses, not small businesses. They were just businesses. And then between my junior and senior year, I was lucky enough to get an internship at U.S. News and World Report, and I worked on the college rankings for U.S. News and World Report the summer before my junior and senior year. And that's where I really started to understand that this is a huge industry. And then a couple of years later, I wanted to come back to DC. I had been living elsewhere as a daily newspaper reporter, and I really wanted to come back to DC, and a great job opened up at the Chronicle of Higher Education. I really didn't think I would cover higher ed for the rest of my life, but I got this job, and as life usually happens, and this is something I always tell 18-year-olds, you never know where life is going to take you. You never know what your major is going to actually produce in terms of a job. I just kind of went with the job, and I was incredibly lucky to work at the Chronicle for more than 16 years in a variety of roles, including being the editor for 4 years.
What's the reaction to the book?
This is a hard book, I will tell you. So my last book, Who Gets In and Why, You're Inside College Admissions, really looked at the process of getting into college, and particularly at those more selective places, right, where there are many more apps than there are seats. And that book did really well, and people really reacted positively to it because it gave them kind of the inside scoop. This was a book that I really wanted to write, but it requires us to widen the lens on higher ed beyond the most prestigious colleges and universities, which is a really hard thing to do in some communities. In some communities, as you know, it is all about prestige. It is all about that sticker on the back of your car. It's all about where you tell your friends where your kid is going to college, right? There's so much caught up in that trying to get people to think beyond the top 25, the top 50 is very difficult. And so, one of the things I try to do with the book is really spend the first quarter of it trying to knock down some myths about the most selective colleges and universities. And that's just really hard to do for some families. And that's the reaction I get from some of them. They kind of politely nod their head and then they move on.
When you're applying for college, should you hire somebody to help you go through the process?
There's a question I get often. I often tell people that unless they're Rick Singer, who is the man behind the Varsity Blues scandal, there is nobody that's going to get you into college, right? So, whether they're a high school counselor or independent counselor, they're not going to get you into college. Often, if people want to know, should they hire an independent counselor, I always say, if you don't have a lot of time, many high school counselors are overstretched because there's just not enough of them. And if there might be a disagreement in your family, maybe the kid wants to go one place or do one thing and the parents want them to do something else. Sometimes an independent counselor can help, right? They could help manage the entire process. They could be a supplement to the high school counselor. And they could help be that arbiter, that independent arbiter, helping you navigate this process.
And I hear this all the time that boys are not getting into colleges. Is that a true statement? Every time I hear that, I scratch my head and think that's not true.
Well, boys are actually getting into college at a higher rate than girls because right now there are way many more girls in college than boys. So the gender divide in higher ed is big and it's growing, 60-40. And that's a big problem. So that's not true that boys are not getting in. In fact, it's just the opposite. More boys are getting in now because colleges are desperate for men.
The pendulum swung.
Yeah, the pendulum is definitely swung.
It's swung and now swinging back. We never get it right in America. We go too far to one side or too far to the other side.
Very true.
Yeah, that's why we're having the conversations here. As we start to wrap up here, what's next for you?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know what's next for me. Right now, I'm just out there enjoying meeting readers, meeting families, trying to navigate this process. My goal is to just continue to help people navigate this complicated college process. So as we move into 2026, I'm just going to continue talking about what I found in the book. I don't know. Maybe there's another book in me. I haven't really thought about that at this point because I've just been so focused the last couple of months on getting this book out into the world.
Do you like writing books?
Ask me when I'm done, yes. But when I'm writing them, no. I mean, writing is, it's hard. I mean, I think anybody who's ever tried to write anything it's hard work. I mean, some days I love it and some days I absolutely hate it. I love the reporting process probably better than the writing process because I just love trying to figure things out and I love talking to people. Putting pen to paper or, pixels on a screen is a little bit more difficult. And every time I finish a book, I say never again. And then a couple months later, I'm back at it.
So, that's one thing that I found when I was producing. I would write all the questions for a lot of the anchors. And then I figured like, why not do the podcast myself? Because, I'm part of the process. So I might as well, be part of the process and continue to do it. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. Thank you so much for joining me, Jeff Zilling. The book is Dream School, Finding the College That's Right for You. You can get that where you get your books. And to you, thank you so much as well. Everyone, be safe until next time.